So in this episode we're in Kensington exploring some of the historic gardens. And Kensington is an area in West London. It's fairly affluent, home to the Royal Kensington Palace, as well as some of London's most famous museums like the Victoria and Albert Museum and the Natural History Museum. There are quite a few green spaces that you can see while walking around. However, a lot of these are actually private keyed gardens in which residents and members have the key. So sadly, members of the public can't usually go in. So in this episode, I'm focusing on 3 gardens that are easily accessible to the public, 2 of which are very big and pretty famous, and one other sneakier one that has a little bit of curious history. If you're new, my name's Katie. I'm a London Blue Badge tourist guide and I run Look Up London, which has public weekend walks and also private tours all across the capital, and you can find out more about booking in the description below. First up is Holland Park. Today it spans about 54 acres and it's open to the public, but it used to be the grounds of Holland House. This was first built in 1605 by Sir Walter Cope, who was a courtier to King James I, and so it was known as Cope Castle. But when Walter died, his daughter Elizabeth married Henry Rich, the first Earl of Holland, and that's where we get the name from. So over the next few centuries it passed down through various lines of the peerage, the earls and later barons of Holland. But I personally think that the most interesting character associated with the house is Lady Holland. Now, she'd inherited a lot of money from the West Indian slave plantations, and she was married off at 15 to a much older man. However, she then had an affair with 3rd Baron Holland, and after a very public divorce, she lost her entire fortune and custody of their children. So, in being a sort of outcast from society, she set up her own glittering social life from Holland House. And they entertained literary guests like Charles Dickens, William Wordsworth and Lord Byron, as well as high-ranking Whig politicians. Now, all of this doesn't mean that she was particularly likeable as a person. She was described as a battle axe and domineering. And when she died in 1845, she was estranged from her children and was later quoted as saying, "I hate my son, I don't like my daughter." Now, when Lady Holland died, the house fell into numerous different hands over the next decades, and there was lots of development on the surrounding estate. And then we get to the Second World War. Holland House was badly damaged, hit by 22 incendiary bombs on the 27th of September 1940. And there's this incredible image, no doubt staged for propaganda, of people still looking in the library of the house. It was sold to the London County Council in 1952, and the remaining wing is now actually a youth hostel, but you can see the remnants of the house today. Now, one of the great things about Holland Park is, as well as this relic, there's a variety of different areas within it. I really like the Iris Garden, which has a beautiful fountain by William Pye. This was unveiled in 1999. And also, make sure you look at the murals. These are painted and celebrate the history of the parties and the social life around Holland House. Within the grounds as well, you have to make sure you look out for the resident peacocks. No one's quite sure why or how they got here. But probably the most famous part of Holland Park is, of course, the beautiful Kyoto Garden. This was a gift from the city of Kyoto and opened in 1991 to mark London's Japan Festival in 1992. And Japanese gardens are intended as a way to celebrate all that nature has to offer, but on a smaller scale. So the trees are meticulously trimmed to enhance their natural shape, and the waterfall represents towering mountain gorges, and there's this still pond to represent the ever-expanding ocean. Now, our second garden is actually a cemetery. Brompton Cemetery is one of London's magnificent 7 cemeteries. In the 19th century, these were burial grounds that were built to deal with the growing crisis of burying the dead in this rapidly expanding city. Brompton opened in 1840 and contains around 35,000 monuments and is the final resting place for well over 200,000 people. And you can find graves of famous faces like the epidemiologist John Snow, famous for his work proving cholera was waterborne, as well as Emmeline Pankhurst, the suffragette and founder of the Women's Social and Political Union, instrumental in achieving the vote for women. But as well as this, it's just a beautiful space. Today it's looked after by the Royal Parks, and it contains some epic architecture with the central avenue leading dramatically to the chapel where funeral services are held. Extending from the chapel is the Great Circle and colonnades, and these were designed by Benjamin Board and modelled on St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. But I also wanted to share one of the more unusual figures who is commemorated here. Within the Great Circle, look out for this cross, decorated with the sign of a wolf. This remembers Long Wolf, chief of the Oglala Sioux tribe and born around 1833. Although initially the Sioux won the Battle of Little Bighorn against the US military, but they were later defeated, and Long Wolf was compelled to tour Europe as part of a travelling show. It was while in London that Long Wolf contracted pneumonia and then later died, age 59, hence being initially buried here. However, from 1996, a woman called Elizabeth Knight was so moved by his story that she contacted his descendants and he was repatriated, now resting peacefully in his ancestral home. One of the joys of walking through Brompton Cemetery is really just to have a look at all of the different names of people through history. And one grave that might catch your eye is of Susanna Nutkin, who died in her 90th year. It's thought that this name might have inspired the local author Beatrix Potter, who regularly would walk in the cemetery and who later wrote, among Peter Rabbit, also the tale of Squirrel Nutkin. For our final garden, we're heading towards South Kensington, an area that's sometimes known as Albertopolis, after Prince Albert. After the Great Exhibition of 1851, a number of cultural and education sites were established here, and one of them was the Imperial Institute. This was established to research into the raw materials and resources across the British Empire. Today, within the grounds of Imperial College, a university in London, you can find the Queen's Lawn. Now, this technically is private land. However, during daylight hours, the gates are open to the public and you can freely walk through. And in the middle of the lawn, you will see the Queen's Tower. At 87 metres or 287 foot tall, it's the only surviving element of the Imperial Institute. Now, the Institute was never really a great success. It was partly taken over by the University of London from 1899, and then the rest of the buildings were demolished in 1957. The tower was envisaged as a viewing gallery, and although it's currently not open to the public, you can see the views here, and I really hope it does open at some point in the future. Thank you for joining me today to discover some of the historic gardens in Kensington. I also have 2 other videos about gardens in Bankside and also in the City of London if you enjoyed this one. Otherwise, I will see you next time for more of London's hidden history.